This time it's 5 forgotten classic motorcycles. Throughout history there have been motorcycles that achieve classic legendary status. Everybody knows what they are, everybody recognises them. But some machines just somehow get forgotten, and capable machines they may be, somehow they just don't seem to get a mention in the annals of time. And so here are 5 forgotten classic motorcycles. Honda's CB750 and 900. Honda's first generation superbike, the CB750, is regarded very much as a classic, but its replacement, the 750 and 900, have somehow been forgotten, as people remember the earlier bike and of course the fabulous 6-cylinder CBX. During the 70s it was increasingly obvious that the CB750 with its single overhead cam engine was becoming increasingly obsolete, but Honda was very much focused on the production of small cars and had taken its eye off the ball when it came to their motorcycles. There would be a trickle of new designs such as the Goldwing, but there was no replacement for the CB750. Well, until 1979 when they finally released their new generation of 4-cylinder sports bikes. The bike was available as a 750 of course, but it was the 900cc bike that really grabbed attention. Like its predecessor, it was an air-cooled Transverse 4, but everything else was pretty much different. There was now true wet sump lubrication, dual overhead cams, and a completely new styling language, all placed on a brand new chassis, which worked very well. Handling was much improved over the earlier, slightly wobbly CB750. The 900 was of 901ccs with a boring stroke of 64.5 by 69, compression ratio was 8.8 to 1, and there was a claimed max power of 95 horsepower at 9,000 rpm. There was a 5-speed gearbox and the bike weighed in at a fairly hefty 568 pounds or 258 kilos dry. The bike, however, is often forgotten. Perhaps its 4-year production run really doesn't help in this regard. But make no mistake, these are very capable machines and would make a really good late model classic, if indeed the 80s is very much your era. Yamaha's FZ or FZ1000. When it comes to sport bikes of the late 80s and early 90s, people like to have conversations about the GSXR and the CBR Fireblade. Somehow the FZR doesn't get into the picture, but historically speaking the bike was very much sandwiched between the two and was for a while the top dog in the sport bike category. Before that is the appearance of the lighter and more compact Fireblade of course. The FZR arrived in 1987 and used a 1003cc inline 4-cylinder engine with dual overhead cams and unusually 5 valves per cylinder. There was a bore and stroke of 75.5 by 56mm and peak power was a claimed 148 horsepower at 10,000 rpm or 136 at the back wheel, although this was restricted to 125 horsepower in some markets. There was a 5-speed gearbox and very effective disc brakes all round. C-type by modern standards was quite low at 770mm, which was helpful because the bike weighed in at 236 kilos or 520 pounds wet weight. The bike first arrived in 1987 at 989ccs, but was replaced with a larger engine in 1989. Further improvement was the introduction of the X-up power valve. This effectively changed the inner diameter of the exhaust, meaning that the engine could develop reasonable power low down and at the same time have a screaming top end. The bike's all-aluminium frame was known as the Delta Box or Genesis frame, and like the rest of the bike this would be much improved in 1989 and was made more compact and lighter. This allowed for the use of smaller 17-inch wheels then coming into vogue, and this would necessitate a complete redesign of the bike's look, with the bodywork being completely redesigned and now having a small letterbox style headlamp at the front. However, in 94 this would be replaced by the new Fox Eye design, and the bike gained 6-pot calipers at the front, although by that point the bike was looking somewhat long in the tooth compared to the new Fireblade. Yamaha would replace it with the YZF-R1000 Thunder Race, but with its rounded bodywork this bike had much more the look of a sports tourer, although 1998 would see the introduction of the R1, the FZR's true spiritual replacement. The Suzuki GS 850. Suzuki's GS850G was a development of the earlier 750. The engine was enlarged to 843 cc's with a bore and stroke of 69 by 56.4, while the compression ratio was a relatively mild 8.8 to 1. Peak power was only a shade more than the earlier 750 at just 77.6 horsepower at 9,000 rpm, and this was enough to push the bike along at around 119 miles an hour, so it was no quicker than the earlier 750, but this bike was really designed to be a sports tourer. The suspension was softer, the seat more comfortable, and all in all the bike was set up to be more torquey and flexible and generally more user friendly. And to double down on its touring bike credentials, the 5-speed gearbox fed through a shaft final drive. Now this would of course soak up a little bit of that power, but not nearly as much as some would have you believe. But it did make the bike heavy at 253 kilos or 567 pounds. But all in all, the GS850G and its 1000cc cousin would both make excellent classic tourers. They're comfortable, extremely well built and solid and reliable, if you ignore the odd regulator rectifier failure of course. It is a Suzuki. Kawasaki GTR 1000. Kawasaki's GTR 1000, also known as the Concourse, was introduced in 1986 and is designed as clearly aimed squarely at BMW's K-Series bikes. The engine was a development of the earlier GPZs, being a liquid-cooled 4-cylinder dual overhead cam engine with 16 valves with a displacement of 997 cc's. Bore and stroke was 74 by 58, and there was a 6-speed transmission with shaft drive. Like the equivalent K-Series BMWs, this was a chunky beast with a 671 pound or 304 kilo wet weight. But the bike was both comfortable and very spacious, and could achieve around 120 miles an hour even with the barn door fairing at the front. And better still, Motorcyclist magazine in the States concluded the machine was actually a better tourer than BMW's equivalent K100 series, which was much more expensive incidentally. And indeed the bike would be a modest success, never having the cachet value of the BMW but being a sensible man's choice, and would remain in production right through until 2006. So you can have a classic 80s tourer and not have to buy a BMW. The first generation Hinckley Triumphs. It may seem strange, but those big chunky first generation Hinckley built Triumphs are now old enough to be considered classic motorcycles in their own right, with the first bikes arriving all the way back in 1991. The machines were based on a modular concept, so essentially there was a 4-cylinder and a 3-cylinder engine, with two varieties using short and long strokes, with the short stroke motors making a 750 triple and a 4-cylinder 1000cc engine, and the longer strokes making a 900 triple and a 1200 4. The chassis is a high tensile spine frame, and whilst there will be those that say it's influenced by Kawasaki practice, it actually bears quite a close resemblance to Triumph's earlier T140 oil-bearing frame. It was soon found that the shorter stroke engines were not nearly as popular as the long stroke engines, with the 885cc 900 triple generally being seen as the early Hinckley Triumph's finest motor, and this 100 horsepower engine would soon be seen pretty much across the entire range, replacing the short stroke engines in the Daytona models and even creating the all-new Street Triple, basically a more aggressive version of the Trident. The 885 engine ran a bore and stroke of 76 by 65, had a 10.6 compression ratio and made its peak 100 horsepower at around 9,000 rpm. But while peak power wasn't anything to write home about, the mid-range torque certainly was, and was a distinctive feature of these early engines. And despite a relatively lardy wet weight of 527 pounds or 239 kilos, the Street Triple could accelerate as quick as pretty much anything on the market in the early 90s. So while most people focus their attention on the later, more powerful and lighter weight triples, these earlier, somewhat over-engineered heavyweights can make a great choice. Whatever bikes or collections of bikes would you like to see us do a future video on? Perhaps you've got a bike we can use for a test ride. Either way, get in touch below. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course thank you very much for watching.